Welcome back to the Biblical Justice Resources podcast. As new generations come of age, it seems almost cliche that older generations don't get the younger ones. I've seen this with my own generation of millennials, and I'm now seeing it with Gen Z. Having observed this phenomenon for multiple generations, what strikes me is that any time an older generation might ask, "Why is the younger generation this way?" an opportunity is presented to see how a new perspective on society can help us make changes for the better. Specifically, it seems like Gen Z, like generations before them, are looking at the world and saying, "Why are things this way?" There is statistical evidence that Gen Z has lower trust in institutions than previous generations. An opportunity to ask what within our institutions might be askew. We see that Gen Z is particularly looking for authenticity and a place of belonging. An opportunity not only to ask what it looks like to be able to include others, but what it means for us to find places of belonging. And Gen Z seems to have a particularly keen interest in justice. An opportunity to see what about our society is unjust, and how this younger generation might help us move in a more just direction. Perhaps all we need to do to get the ball rolling is to ask these questions. All of this informs our conversation with today's guest, Holly Bishu. Through her 10 years of designing programs and ecosystems for Gen Z, with particular experience in youth ministry, Holly has seen a generation ready to step into leadership and build collective power. Now, Holly partners with teams to help organizations bridge the gap between good intentions and effective Gen Z engagement, translating vision into relational systems that sustain trust and leadership. Through our conversation today, you'll learn how co-creation, authenticity, and trust building are necessities when interacting with Gen Z, and you'll get a brief detour into a discussion of American history along the way. Now, if you will, join me for this conversation with Holly Bishu. My name's Eric, and this is the Biblical Justice Resources podcast. Our conversation will begin right after this. The Biblical Justice Resources podcast is supported by listeners like you at patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and helping to resource individuals and the church for the pursuit of biblical justice, please consider giving today at patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources. Again, visit patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources to help support the podcast. Now on with the show. Holly, thank you for joining me here on the podcast.
Welcome. Are we keeping that?
No, it'll all be cut off. So
Okay.
the listeners and viewers will just have to wonder about what happened before.
It's great to be here.
And it's good to have friends on the podcast too.
It
People
is
who I actually
fun,
know
isn't
in
it?
real life. Not that I
It's
haven't
fun.
known other people, but not quite in the same sort of friend sort of way.
That's fair. I think that it's different when it's like, oh, the person I'm interviewing is one of my wife's best friends. Right?
Probably. I guess we'll find out through the rest of our time together. But
I am
as
also your friend. I am not
yes,
just one of your wife's best friends. We are also friends. We have hung out.
yes, we have established that
Yes, it's important.
it is important. But we are here. All the things that we've talked about that we are not actually talking about today. We are here to talk about Gen Z and about what we're seeing out of Gen Z and all of those things in particular. And as I was thinking about the conversation, I had this thing come to mind, I guess, that there were so many conversations about millennials, which we probably felt particularly as millennials. But I don't
Yeah.
think we quote unquote solved whatever the millennial question would be. And now we're on to Gen Z. And with the age range of Gen Z, they're already almost turning 30.
Mm-hmm.
So, so what are we doing?
Okay. I think that that's a really good way to start because as millennials, people had no idea what a millennial was. And so for the first half of Gen Z sort of coming of age and graduating from high school, people were still calling them millennials because millennial was kind of a pejorative in like the boomer generation of why don't they just buy houses? It's because they drink too many lattes and eat too much avocado toast. Like, do you remember those things?
Yep.
And it was avocado toast got a really bad rap. Which, by the way, avocado toast is delicious. People need to. Also, my avocado toast is not going to get me closer to buying a house. Like, giving that up is not going to get me closer to buying a house. So, but I think that the way that sort of rhetoric built and snowballed the became the sort of guiding mantra of people older than millennials of what a millennial is struggling with, rather than asking millennials, what are you struggling with? Right? And I think that's one of the problems we have in next gen thinking and in next generation work innovation is we try to sort of from the outside say what the problems are rather than engaging that generation in conversation and like listening to voices from people who are living that reality. So, yeah, that's just an aside going, this is what like most people are left with like, did we solve the question or whatever? And I was like, you never asked the right one because you didn't ask the
Yeah.
right people. Wouldn't it have been better to ask millennials what we're struggling with and then figure out the solves from there? We try to create these systems, like societally, institutions try to create these systems that are meant to answer a question that was asked by by the institution rather than by the people they seek to serve. And it's just like a really backwards way of solving in my mind. Maybe that's harsh, but like in my mind, when I think what are we seeing, the best way to find out what we're seeing is by going straight to the generation. And so when you ask me that, what I think of is like data that I've read of research questions and polls and stuff that have been asked directly to Gen Z. I think of my years of doing youth ministry and years spent just hanging out with Gen Zers, the Gen Zers that I still text and call and are calling me and um, just asking them what's happening in their lives and what they're thinking about and what's important to them. And I was listening to a really cool podcast yesterday. Funny, it feels meta to talk about a podcast on podcast, but I was listening to a podcast called Anchor Change, and Dr. Sarah Stamper, who works at an organization called Murmuration, she is um, the chief research officer, I believe, and she does a lot of research around civic engagement, and she has a deep interest in Gen Z. And one of the things that she said is that young people, as a generation, young people actually don't have that many different concerns than other generations at this point. Like they have kind of the same concerns that the rest of us do, making a good living, costs rising, job security, what does my future look like? Will I own a home? Those kinds of things that we're all kind of muddling through together. But they differ in two places, she said. They differ in politics and they differ in work. And so how they engage those two things are different than sort of the other generations that have happened. Um, that young people are more involved politically, even if they're like less likely to vote. So they're going to be involved in protests, in direct action, um, in like following movements and being part of and creating movements and doing so creatively, um, which might not necessarily translate to them going to the polls, but they are still like invested in like those processes and in seeing change in the world and believing that change is possible. And then with work, um, just less beholden to the machine, letting
Yeah.
themselves like be done at the end of the day. Uh, Not feeling like they need to follow these unwritten rules that a lot of us older people have felt in terms of, the pressure to stay longer and do more. Like they're just like, nah. I'm good. So boundaring their time around work and not letting work define them. Those are the two places that we're seeing, like data-wise across the board. Um, Young people differ. I think a big thing that marks that this generation more than others is trust in institutions. Um, Gen Z trust in institutions is like super low. I'm talking like maybe 16, 17% of Gen Z would say that they trust institutions. Trust in general is really hard, and they're more likely to trust a person, but like that trust has to be earned and kept.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes through authenticity and being real, being human. Um, they're less drawn in by the very polished. That's like gonna lead to lesser trust. And it's like, are you a real human? And then another thing is just a desire for belonging. We are seeing an erosion of like just community spaces where um, young people can belong and be part of something. And so there's a desire for that, and I think that authenticity and belonging go together.
So that a couple, I mean, you said a bunch of different things in there, so there are a couple of different thoughts circling. Maybe we'll start off with the listening aspect. And what comes to mind is not just asking questions of Gen Z, but what questions are being asked when you do ask questions. Uh, the person that came to mind is Simon Sinek. Are you aware of Simon Sinek?
Yes.
So this goes back to the conversations about millennials, but I remember him talking about like workplaces asking millennials, what do you want? And it's like beanbags and free time or whatever, and in the workspace. But that's not
Hmm.
actually what they wanted. It's like we were asking a question at a surface level and we're getting a surface level answer that wasn't actually digging into what actually millennials were looking for, which I think
Right.
goes along the same lines of this belonging, particularly
Yeah.
in the workspace, belonging, being listened to, being heard, being part of this, a collaborative process, maybe. What sorts of questions then dig down below the surface level? What types of questions are actually going to get responses where you're helping uh, whether it be a Gen Z person or any person in particular, to like actually hear what their sort of core needs are.
I think I'd maybe approach it differently. Um, if you're beginning from a place of low trust, then the first thing you got to do is earn trust to get true answers and get like you'll get true answers, but I think those kind of questions are best found in relationship and in getting to know somebody and like the continued conversation and you notice things coming up over and over again. And so, at least for me, it's less maybe what is the correct question and more how do we uncover things together through conversation instead of positioning it as me asking you to do for you. I'm far more interested in you name this in a collaborative space. So even in the question asking, like, of course, there are specific questions we can ask of like, what makes you come alive? What are you really worried about? Um, what is meaningful to you? When you imagine yourself in 10 years, who do you see? What dreams do you have for the world? We can ask those questions, and I think those questions span the generations. I think they're important to ask of anybody. Um, but more often than not, what I have found is actually that I can get deeper if I'm willing to have an ongoing conversation and I'm caring about the things they care about. And as I do that, slowly but surely, it uncovers what they're actually talking about and thinking about and worrying about.
Which in that case, it's the work then is just continuing to show up and do the work. It's continuing to show up
Yes.
and be in relationship. So in that aspect, the point I guess I'm trying to make here is not like there's not like a magic formula. Like we're not implementing a like here's what you can do that you haven't been doing in an easy sort of way. In like a
Yeah. I mean, I don't think humans work like that,
Right.
right? Like there is no magic wand. There is no, like, if there was, we would have already done it, right? Like, I think sometimes we can sort of, I don't know, default to an idea that we just haven't uncovered the right thing yet. And once we do, that'll fix it. But when has that worked in human history? Like, it works with vaccines, I guess. Like, that's cool. And it works with certain things, but I don't think humans are too complicated for that. There's too many variables. There's too many different ways we interact with each other, and um we go the things we go through that it's just, yeah, it's too hard to have one simple fix. I think that in the journey towards authenticity and belonging, that has to necessarily be a long game. Like being a safe space for somebody, being somebody that people can trust, like that's built over time. And so trying to do a quick fix for something that is meant to be built over time is gonna fail.
Yeah.
I actually have another thought while
Sure.
you sort of think about what I'm saying. I think that's why we're actually struggling often with what to do, just generally with next gen stuff. We like quick answers. We like, yeah, like you said, like what is the question we can ask so that we can fix the thing. But that's also a bit of like a consumer mentality. I think that relates to, the ways we see people as problems to be solved, and then we solve them and move on to the next thing. It's this efficiency, time is money, like we can't waste time, productivity, you are what you produce. Like it's not letting people be people. And the beauty in humanity is the complexity in humanity, I think. That there is so much nuance, so much gray area, that everybody has a story and it's worth hearing people's stories. And so I think getting out of the mindset of like, what is the one question we should ask? The mindset of a person is a problem to solve, and once we solve the problem, we can move on to the next thing and like use our time for better things. I just simply I think that that's part of what we need to unlearn and like slow down in the pursuit of knowing people and of knowing what the next step is. And then from there, in the slowing down, I think we get to speed up once we work with people and build systems that actually serve the people we're seeking to serve, rather than like going straight to finding a solution and then having an inefficient solution and suddenly you're going backwards.
Yeah. And to all of that last point, my mind was said, so an American perspective to the capitalism, the fixing, the that sort
Yes.
of thing. I can't get
Yes.
away from it.
Well, I think when I was talking to somebody yesterday and saying like, as a country, the US makes more sense as a corporation than it does like as a nation state looking for the protection of its people, right? From a political standpoint, or just like my background's in poli sci, right? So the point of the state is to protect its people, and that's why you pay taxes and you pay into infrastructure and stuff like that so that you have a quote unquote safe place to be. Democracy. This is the democratic ideals are that we the people, theoretically, we the people have a say in the place that we live and in the place that we are citizens of. But capitalism has taken such deep root in our world, yes, but in America in wild ways, that things are more about how much money you can generate than they are about the person that you are. And that's really, really unfortunate. And I think we miss out because of it.
Yeah. I wonder then what that says about the Gen Z political engagement, civic engagement, uh, what that says about what they're looking for. I mean, again, we're now condensing this down to the entire group and what the the entire generation is looking for. But if Gen Z statistically is more politically engaged, is there a general like Gen Z going in one direction in their engagement, or is it split in different ways, or what does that look like?
I think it's split. Yeah. And it depends on who you're asking and where you're asking. I think
Yeah.
we're seeing a trend sort of rightwards with young Gen Z men, and that's scary. Um, and I say scary because of the ways that they've been pulled into that. I'm not saying I'm anti-conservative or whatever, but tending towards closer to the far right. Your Charlie Kirks were really Charlie Kirk, your Joe Rogan, the Manosphere, like that has served to draw in a lot of young men. Um, and even just like that that side of politics has had more of a big tent belonging sort of movement of are you frustrated about these things? Then come be here with us. It's less about what you believe and more gathering on like anger and the world that you wish existed and it doesn't anymore and all of those things. Um, and then yeah, you go like sort of big tent, just come belong here. They've done that well. But also you have this massive generation of young people who care deeply about living in a more just world, living in a world that takes care of people, living in a country that isn't grabbing people up off the streets, isn't ignoring democratic ideals, uh, isn't ignoring climate change. Like these is like thinking about universal health care. These issues that really are about care for people and living justly and care for environment and the world around us, care for places that are experiencing genocide. Um, a lot of young people really, really loud about Palestine, which is awesome. That's also something we see. So it really just depends where you are and the spaces that you're in. And again, I think both things can be true at once. You can have like a large section who is passionate about these issues of justice and simultaneously have a cohort that is moving towards the people who are talking about more affordability for groceries, more access to the middle class, more like a future you can look towards for young men being like, this is what it means to be a man and step into your masculinity. I think both are true at once.
I'm curious on the justice side. I feel like there are a lot of people who have identified that Gen Z is interested in justice in a way that previous generation, like it is more intensified amongst Gen Z than previous generations. Uh, what what about their either practice or pursuit of justice is similar from what we've already seen in history recently? And what is different, changing, evolving, intensifying? What does that look like right now in Gen Z?
I think a massive difference, and um, we have to name it, is like a 24-hour news cycle and not just the 24-hour news cycle, which we sort of grew up in. We have memory of a non 24-hour news cycle, I think. Hopefully, I do. Um, but also like access at your fingertips to everything that's happening in the world. So actually, I will name that as a secondary thing. Before that, like this generation came up in just like an ongoing slew of, you know, once in a generation events. And they just keep happening, right? So, a lot of this generation was born after 9/11, which means they've known like their entire lives have been post 9/11 world, particularly in America. You've got the war on terror, and then you've got the 2008 market crash. And then you've got you know, Obama's election, which is awesome, and great for the world, for America. But then, so you have some stability, but still things going on in the world. And then, you know, we see a change with the election of 45 and the ways that that created so much instability. And then it's the pandemic. And a lot of these students were coming of age in the pandemic. So graduating high school during the pandemic or just before, um, graduating college during the pandemic or just before, and then now living in this economic time of recession, it's just like constant. There hasn't really been chill for them. Um, and so that's going to affect what is important to them, right? And affect the ways that they process what it means to be a good citizen in the world. But in addition to that, it's not just that these things are happening, it's that it's getting fed to them directly constantly, which is the secondary thing I said. So they don't turn off and they got access to that much sooner. I like Instagram wasn't live on the App Store until October of 2010. I graduated from high school in June of 2010. So it wasn't until college that my access to something like Instagram even happened. Twitter was before that, but I was never on Twitter till 2011-ish. Um, Facebook I was on when I was 15, but even that wasn't that's still a closed circuit, right? I grew up in a world and I was born in 92, so I'm some of the last millennial. Millennial goes to like 94 depending on who you are and how you're counting, but like I'm at the end of the millennials, which you're just like a year ahead of me. So are you.
Yeah.
We Our relationship to social media came in adulthood largely. Um, and when our brains were mostly formed. Whereas we're talking about young people who have not known a world outside of the existence of social media, outside of access to all of the information at your fingertips. So we're talking about young people who do not know a world outside of constant information and brains that are developing in a space where they're constantly being inundated with news that probably is too big for the level of development that they have. Like it's not age appropriate, right? You have access to not age appropriate things. And I don't mean like inappropriate. I just mean that our brains are not meant to engage all of those things from jump. A 10-year-old should not have knowledge of like certain things in the language it's being expressed in. You know, there's there are ways our brains develop and there are things that really affect our brain's development. Um, the first iPhone came out when I was in ninth grade. I was a freshman in high school, but like that means that it was only early adopters. It was super expensive. Like that wasn't a huge thing to have like a smartphone for most of my high school years. I didn't get my first iPhone till I had graduated. I got it in like October of 2010. So I was an early adopter on Instagram, but again, we were mostly sharing just our lives with weird filters. You know, like it wasn't
Yeah.
this influencer space didn't quite exist yet and all of those things. And that's just not the world we have today. So we actually at the making of the iPhone, we see this upward tick in mental health issues because suddenly this comparison is available and you can see so much more of what people around you are doing. Globalization has changed the world in so many ways. And then we saw this digital globalization, right? In the same way that foods have um, crossed country lines and crossed seas because of globalization and trade. And then as more innovation happened, like we saw more of that happen when airplanes became a thing because airplanes are faster, right? Than ships or than on land. Every time we see these sort of massive innovations, it changes the way the world interacts with each other. And this was a massive shift. And for us, we integrated it into our lives so we know a world before it. For the generation after us, there is no world before the iPhone. There is no world before the iPad, the tablet, the smartphone. There is no world before this interconnectedness that you have to opt out of rather than opt into like we did.
Yeah. And you identified that a couple times already. This, not just, I mean, globalization is the influence or an influence in this, but like kids now, young adults now are thinking about being a citizen in the world, not just a citizen in a country. Uh, I had this on a previous on the list to ask you anyways, since you have experience in multiple countries. What does this look like in different countries? Because I mean, this podcast is going to be fairly or almost exclusively American centric, would be my guess. So that's what our perspective is going to be. But how are people around the world experiencing this right now?
So I think that's an interesting question. Having lived in the American context, I think there are things that are specific to the American context, and one of them is the American centricness of Americans. The other parts of the world do not operate in that way. Um, America being the quote unquote superpower that it is, sort of doesn't have to look outside of the borders. Um, and because America creates a lot of popular culture, a lot of, like a lot of media, it comes out of the US, has a lot of political power within the world, a lot of trade power. Americans are raised with this exceptionalism and this lack of need to look outside the borders because America did it best, but that's just not the rest of the world's analysis of America. And so for the rest of us, and I say this, and maybe I should name this for listeners, I am a Canadian who did live in Minneapolis for a few years and I live really close to the border. Fun fact, 80% of Canadians, I think it is 80 to 90% of Canadians live within 100 miles of the American border. So we're all very concentrated towards the southern border. Um, and so my life has been deeply influenced by American influences. Like I live 30 minutes from the border. I have crossed the border more than 150 times in my lifetime. That's in like 33 years, and there was a pandemic in there. So that says something. Um, the rest of us don't have the superpower that America does. Not most of us, anyways. I would say maybe China does. Outside of that, like we have to work together with other countries to import export. And those trade deals are really important to our functioning. We take our influences from other countries. We also don't maybe like we don't maybe get rid of the influences of other countries in our national histories. Um, like we're honest about those things in some ways, and I think the way that America was built and was created, the American Revolution, sort of led to this American exceptionalism and this rah rah America builds herself, the American experiment. Um, and I think other countries don't do that in the same way. Um, and so, yeah, it's a really interesting thing for the rest of to be in other spaces in the world to like talk to Europeans or talk to Canadians even. And I was talking to someone I know from the UAE, like who lives in Dubai, and just asking the question, really, like, even what is your view on America and what are you seeing? And it's just, at best, people are looking quizzically. At worst, people are like, what is happening? Like, why are they allowing this? So I would say that like in terms of younger generations and what we're seeing, like I think we're still seeing the same things that American younger generations are seeing. I just think it's a little further in understanding like relationship to the rest of the world and a more global perspective, which is
Yeah.
hard for Americans often.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you name that about American exceptionalism because this is not the entire scope of where this podcast is, but if I don't say it, it's going to be stuck in my head. But just thinking about like what is myth and what is fact about what is
Hmm.
actually uh, the United States and where that exceptionalism comes from. Because in my mind, I was like, even after the revolution, the United States was not like the United States was much smaller than we currently are after the revolution 250 years ago now. But so it's like, when did this like power thing actually come in? Realistically, it maybe actually was that far back, even though we were small. Like, you still needed to have some sort of partner, but it was so far away from Europe and where the that sort of
Hmm.
trade would have been at the time. And even up into the 20th century, I think like World War II obviously puts the United States in a different place as Europe is trying to rebuild. But prior to that, there was very much an isolationism in the United States where it's like
Hmm.
we are capable, even though there's still like trade necessary, probably, we are capable to be far enough away from the world geographically to just do our own thing, basically,
Hmm.
and not need the rest of the world in that way. So,
Yeah, I mean that, and like historically speaking, this is fun for me because history background, but that's Woodrow Wilson post World War One, right? The rest of the world, because World War One was the world in this massive war. That's the name of it. And before World War II happened, it was called the Great War, the war to end all wars. This hadn't happened in the world in this way because the world wasn't connected in this way up until that point, right? And so all of these countries are taking sides, and it's one side against the other in World War One. And then when it ends in 1918, the rest of the world is like, it's, yeah, Armistice Day, November 11th, 1918, end of World War One. And the world is trying to rebuild. It's not just Europe or not just, all it's the world is trying to figure out what is the world we live in now, and that's where like the League of Nations start. That's the precursor to the UN, right? So we are seeing these sort of countries from all over coming together to have a central place where the world's leaders connect. And America says, "No thanks." After World War One, the decision of the American government and Woodrow Wilson at that point, as far as I remember, if I'm correct, is like, we're good. We don't need the rest of the world. Y'all got it. We're not getting drawn into y'all's skirmishes again. So we're gonna do our own thing over here. And you see um that isolationism, the ideology of isolationism go until 1941 when Japan bombs Pearl Harbor. America didn't enter the war until then. So World War II starts in 1938. But America doesn't join until 1941. And that's only because they were directly bombed. Outside of that, they didn't, like, America was not interested in dealing with whatever the rest of the world was dealing with. And it's interestingly, one, World War II saves America from the Depression and a lot of the world from the Depression. Like, realistically, it was war that blew industry up, and suddenly money is coming back in and jobs are created. But then two, America comes out of World War II as a massive superpower, opposed by largely the Soviet Union. And suddenly it's the US versus the Soviet Union as the two superpowers. And really they're symbols for democracy versus communism. And it's the Cold War. And from that point, from this isolationism, now we see America be involved in every war, it feels like. And suddenly you see American fingerprints everywhere, but as the hero. And this myth comes alive of who America is. And America is this superpower. America is the savior of the world. America is the big champion of democracy. And it's like America left the rest of the world to do whatever. Like America wasn't stopping Hitler in 38 or in 35. as the Weimar Republic is like figuring their stuff out, like America didn't care.
Yeah. There's so much more there to mine, but I'm gonna bring us
But I'm
back to
saying
some other
like that
stuff.
that
Yeah.
question between myth and fact, but I think that it is important because what you're seeing now with a greater conversation with everybody and social media and all of these things is that a generation who's going, "Yo, have we been lied to?"
Yeah.
Right? Like who are sort of coming out of this space of American exceptionalism going, America's actually really has really big problems. Like in many ways, it seems actually that the American experiment has failed. And if we're going to save it, what do we need to change? How do we need to do things differently? And we're seeing these creative things come out of these younger generations, ways that they're stepping up sooner and louder and grassroots movement. But there's such a divide between the people who are running things and the people who are trying to change things that I think that's the place I'm trying to bridge. Trying to be like, we need to listen. If we want to see change come to the world, if we want to not continue to go in the direction of authoritarianism, if we want to see democracy survive, then something needs to give because the way that institutions are built right now, the way that we're governing right now is not working. It's just not. One side is like speed running authoritarianism, and then the other side is not mounting enough of a resistance and is maybe a little too concerned about conserving power and not caring about who pays the price in the process. And so then this group of people actually slides closer to this group of people. And you've got the masses going, what in the world? We like these are people's lives and not just the pursuit of money and power.
Yeah, which speaks to the growing distrust in institutions,
Exactly.
which I'm just imagining someone back to voices being voiced
Oh,
in
now
our heads.
you're bringing in the things that they're not going to hear the context for. Cool. Now we sound
But
crazy. Sorry, don't
I'm
use the word
just,
crazy.
yep, I'm just imagining someone uh, who does not hold this perspective of American experiment on the decline or failing, and thinking, at the very least, that is the feeling among the younger generation. Like, if you want to set aside whether the experiment is failing or not, that is the feeling among a growing group of younger
Hmm.
generations, not just Gen Z. Millennials have been feeling this too
Oh,
for a long time
absolutely.
from personal experience. But so for us, millennials and Gen Z, it is more than a feeling. It is this like, have we been lied to? It seems like we have been lied to about where we are. I
It's a
mean,
betrayal in a lot of
my
ways.
life would look different if I had like not gone to college immediately or whatever, like tried to figure stuff out before I made very large decisions that are continuing to impact my life. So it's for as much as we started the conversation with there are not like the right or wrong quote unquote questions to ask, there's still this like gap that needs to be bridged, like you just said, between generations of understanding, I guess, at the very least, or a shared reality, I guess, is maybe where my brain is headed towards. Is what does it look like to try and bridge this to have a shared reality of what is happening and like actual practical
Yeah.
like implementation? What does that look like?
Well, I think like that's where authenticity comes into play, right? I think being honest about the state of life right now. Can we be real and see that the economy is not helping most people who aren't at the very top of the earnings? Like that jobs are really hard to get, that it is scary to come of age in this time. It is scary to try and build a family in this time. It is scary to Like, is the world gonna burn? Should I have children? Climate change is very real and climate anxiety is at an all is like super high. Fair. Can we be honest about these things and not seem at the institutional level like we've got it all figured out and there's nothing to worry about and sort of put these moral purity tests into play like you got to believe the right things to belong. Can we just be honest and be like, we're trying things because it seems like all of the things we thought would hold are not holding. And let's co-create. Let's work on it together. I think that's going to be the bridge. Also, I will say like younger generations are not as like side based. They're thinking about issues and the people who are speaking on the issues they care about. And so it's less about picking your party or your side and more about, I care about these things. Are you talking about these things? And if it means breaking from the party, if somebody is not speaking that language, they're like, okay, I don't trust that institution anyways. Like, this is what I mean. So, even like breaking away from an institutional mind of feeling like we need to fit these boxes and really just getting down to the ground and meeting people where they're at, have conversations, create spaces where people can gather as community. I think the thing that's going to get us out of this, like I said, speed run towards authoritarianism is going to be collective. It's going to be collective. It's going to be people together. It's going to be getting super local and having conversations at the local level. It's hanging out at community centers and libraries, shoring up public infrastructure so that they're accessible to more people, so that people can gather in these spaces. Again, Dr. Sarah Stamper talks about like the erosion of third spaces and how that actually erodes civic engagement. So if we can shore up these third spaces so that people can gather and it's easily accessible, we can have more conversations because it's not going to be one person saving the world. It's going to be everybody together doing their part. And I think that in the younger generations, we have more of an understanding of that. We have more of an understanding and even desire, I would say, for the village mentality. How do we work together? How do we show up for each other? We see group chats that come up. It came up in that podcast I listened to again yesterday. But like we've been in, even you and I, we've seen where one of us is struggling and the other, like others show up. I think of things that you and your wife do and, the groups of friends that you two have, the places we've been involved together, the ways we show up together to make a change rather than this individualism and exceptionalism that has come about over years of this American experiment and, myth creation. How do we believe a new story?
Yeah. I have one more question with the time we have that deserves so much more time than we're going to be able to devote to it.
Part two, maybe.
The 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 upper level of this, which I will make smaller, but the upper level of this is what does this mean for the church, which
Mm,
again could be its own hour long, multiple
yeah.
hours long thing. I think the context I want to put that in is that I've spent the last few years really involved in realistically majority white church spaces where even though churches are being told about this distrust in institutionalism that is reaching into the church as well, the church is an institution.
Mhm.
Even with that context, those statistics, that knowledge, it still seems like there's this draw of, well, we just need to bring people back to the church, but there's not trust in the church. So, what does it look like then to actually not uh, I've got hangups with evangelicalism, even though I am still inside of it. And so
You
the
sure
training
are.
to just go out and evangelize, like, that's not like what I'm trying to push towards, but more of just like, I guess, how does the church exist right now for young people? For people who are distrusting institutions, for people who are leaving the faith because of, again, this is way too many things for one question, but
Yeah, but I
whatever
think I
insight you
think
have.
yeah, I mean, luckily, like the church you've been involved in for the last few years, I was on the pastoral staff of. So, we have some shared experience. And I'm not on that team anymore, but I appreciate them a lot. They're still family to me, you know that, and I've been back since. Um, what worked there for me in running the youth ministry there was going and getting out of the church. I hung out with students. I picked students up from school. I went for coffee with students. I showed up at lunchtime at like the biggest Christian school that was represented at our church because that was the biggest school represented in our youth group. And I made connections at this school to say, hey, I'm a local pastor. My kids go to this school. Can I come hang out at lunch? And they were like, yes, please. The school and the church are denominationally affiliated. And so I could literally be like, we're in the same denomination. And the church is actually the widest represented church at that school. So me saying,
Interesting.
hey, yeah. So me saying,
It
hey,
does make sense, but yeah,
can I come hang out here? Because I have so many students that go here. Can I get to know other students? And they were super open to it. And so I just started showing up every other week at lunchtime. It got really normal to see me around the hallways. Students started to know me that didn't go to our church. But also that growth didn't just come by me going, but our students who came to youth group actually were already talking to their friends about youth group. So when I said to a student, "Oh, I'm the youth pastor at so and so," the students would that I was speaking to were like, "Oh, that's where this student goes and this student goes and this student goes." And I'm like, "Oh, they found their place and it worked through co-creation." I asked their opinions. I asked what they want to have in the space. I asked what is important to you to talk about, and I asked them to help me build the space and the culture, and they did enough that they were willing to consistently bring friends. And I would say about 50% of retention in that space was as a result of students bringing friends. And that wasn't from just that school. Like that was just a thing that happened. Students bring their friends. Um, did they come into the church? Yes. But that was because that specific place in the church was their space and they knew it was their space and they knew they were going to find their snacks that they asked for, that they were going to find their beverages that they wanted, that they could hang out on the beanbags, they could hang out and then they'd do some learning and then they'd hang out in a small group with leaders who cared about them. We'd created a space of belonging, but you didn't necessarily have to come into the doors to receive the invitation. I, at this point in my life, I'm less tied to the four walls of a church. Um, that's simply like we use the word church to mean the four walls, but really that's just the receptacle for what we're doing, which is church. The church is the gathering. It's the people. And I know that's like we've heard that all our lives if you've grown up in church or whatever. You've heard that. But like genuinely, when you ask like what can we be doing as Christians? I think we need to actually look ancient, straight to Jesus. And what marks Jesus as different than the rest of the gods that we hear about is that Jesus came and lived among people and became one of us, like fully human and living the experience of a human in the places that humans were. Jesus didn't expect people to like come to him. He moved and traveled among the people. And as he was going, he was affecting the things that affected them. So, yes, he was forgiving them of sins and he was meeting the needs. So, we see like, so that's the reason we see so many stories of healings because that was the need that they had. You can't see, and so you're stuck at this gate because you can't provide for yourself. You're leprous, so you're cast out of the community. You have been bleeding for 12 years, so you're cast out of the community. You're not even able to like touch other people. You your legs don't work. You can't walk. You're about to die. We see Jesus meet the immediate needs and declare forgiveness of sins, say that the breach between people and God is has been healed and they are restored. And in fact, makes that the bigger deal, less so all of the things you've done wrong and more this breach that exists between you and God has been healed and bridged by me, not me, but Jesus. And and we see him heal. We see him name faith for healing and we see him meet people where they're at. And so I am far less interested in this big evangelistic push that is let's go save souls, and more like if you go to your brother and sisters, say, go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed, do nothing about it, and do nothing about his physical needs. What good is it? That's James 2. We've been given this model, this beautiful model of what kingdom inauguration looks like, of what it means that the kingdom has broken into our world, and it's sight to the blind, freedom for prisoners, uh, you know, uh, good news for the poor. The most marginalized among us will have provision because the kingdom has broken in. And until the church actually lives authentically into that, I think that the church, the church's witness is largely in our world.
Amen. Thank you for listening to the Biblical Justice Resources Podcast. This podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Eric Beck. To learn more about how you can be resourced for the pursuit of biblical justice, visit our website at biblicaljusticeresources.com.